Hey everybody, Steve here, Local Level Podcast. I'm sitting here today with Brian Bohley. He's the owner of inFocus Payroll in Evanston, Illinois. You can check out more about his company at inFocusPayroll.com. And Brian, it's a real pleasure to have you on.
Thanks for having me, Steve.
Absolutely. Yeah. And, I always have a phone call with the people beforehand, that I have on the show to kind of get a feel for, where you're at and, what you're about. And we did a marathon. We were talking for, what was it? We were talking for 2 hours because there's so many different things going on in the world, obviously. You're very close to it because you deal with payroll and, kind of getting into bookkeeping. And that's a really important thing nowadays because of, the PPP loans and all the different things with people's businesses right now. So let's back up a little bit though. Tell everybody a little bit about what you do. What is inFocus Payroll about, and kind of what's your story?
Sure. Well, yeah, Steve. Payroll is really big right now, and so is bookkeeping for many reasons. But the main reason is cash flow.
Right.
And businesses right now don't have cash coming in, and so they really have to pay close attention to the cash going out. Payroll is one of the biggest expenses. So that's always a big deal because you're also dealing with people's livelihood.
Right.
So to touch on how I started the payroll service back in 2012, I had been working for large payroll services since 2006. And what I found was there was a common theme where it was, how can we automate everything to the point where we don't have to talk to people? We don't have to actually resolve issues or,
right.
Correct problems. And when problems did occur, it was a nightmare. Clients would have to call in multiple times to get updates. Internal staff didn't even know what to say. There were a lot of low-paid reps that were trying to communicate and try to pacify the client, but really didn't know what was going on. And there were people behind the scenes working on kind of putting a Band-Aid on things and trying to resolve things in the short term just to close the ticket,
right.
The support ticket.
Right.
And not really treating the human like a human, more like just a defect.
Sure.
And so I spent a lot of time working at Sure Payroll was one of the companies, got bought out by Paychex. Okay. They had about 35,000 small business clients at the time. So I worked with a lot of small businesses. And, I saw it all. And a lot of things that happened were mistakes that the owner would make because they were in a hurry trying to process payroll. We didn't catch it. And then it was too late. There was an amendment or an adjustment that needed to be done, and which caused tax notices, tax penalties. And then on top of it, we were charging the client hundreds, sometimes thousands of dollars to fix a mistake that really shouldn't have been made. It was just because of user interface wasn't working for that client. So that's why I started the payroll service. After about 2 years of complaining to my friends and family,
right.
They finally just had enough and kind of helped coax me into starting it.
It's interesting that you bring up, this is a reoccurring thing. I mean, as far as treating people like a human being, and I've been talking to a lot of attorneys lately, and everybody kind of has a different story, and everybody kind of has a background either working for a large corporation or, whatever. And whenever they decide to open their own thing, for the most part, it's for that reason, because there isn't that connection. You want to be able to offer something more than what's been available. And I think one of the big parts of our conversation that we had before was, that you want to do it a little differently. The problems that you bring up where there's problems happening where you have, tax problems now you owe money. There's all these things that, especially now, that stuff can't happen. I mean, that is the difference between being in business and being out of business. So it's more important than ever to have somebody like you, obviously on as an advocate, kind of like a partner in understanding in depth, where you're not just a ticket, like you said. Tell us a little bit about kind of how you do things a little different than like the big giant corporations, like you mentioned before.
Sure. So a lot of these companies have what's called exception fees, and they're not talked about by the salesperson. They're not really talked about at all until an issue comes up. I think they might be referred to. The document is referred to in the agreement that the client first signs. And these exception fees basically lay it out for the client that if there's an issue, it's their fault. They're not going to take any responsibility for issues that come up. And so one of the things that I've done is I try to educate my clients. And a lot of times, I mean, they're looking to save time. They're not looking to become payroll experts. So I don't educate them right away. A lot of times I wait for a mistake to happen, and I use that as an opportunity to educate them. And I don't charge them the first time they make a mistake. I use that as a educational opportunity.
Yeah, sure.
And I call it mistake forgiveness, kind of like Allstate with their accident forgiveness.
Yeah.
So that's one of the unique things that I do. Another thing is I try not to charge for implementation fees, even though I spend a lot of time implementing clients, especially if they're mid-year, mid-quarter, mid-month, with history, starting out with history. That's a lot of work to make sure that you have all of the different wages and deductions and taxes all matching up exactly, because you're basically taking the information from one system and putting it into another. And so I try not to charge for that, because I believe that if you get a client off to a good start and things are smooth, it doesn't leave a bad taste in their mouths. And then that if an issue does come up down the road, it's not as painful.
Sure. Yeah. It's more important than ever to have good business practices in place and kind of a support structure. I guess let's for the people that aren't totally familiar with how payroll companies work and all those things, because some people just use QuickBooks and that's all they do. What are the benefits? What are the main services that you really provide? What are the problems that you solve for your clients?
Sure. So, QuickBooks has actually changed a lot of things on their end, to the point where if you use their payroll service or payroll functionality within their software, the online QuickBooks Online, they will actually force you to use their payroll service. So that's happening a lot. So there are a lot of small businesses using QuickBooks Online and another service called Gusto. And pretty much most payroll services do is they take on all of the responsibilities for tax filings, tax deposits, providing all of the documents that the employees need, like pay stubs and W-2s, all the reporting that's necessary for workers' comp audits, and just really, providing all the information. It's I consider most of the services to be glorified software, because really they are considered reporting agents. Payroll and inFocus Payroll as well as a reporting agent, and what that means is we're just going to take what's in the payroll system and use that for your tax filings and your tax deposits. If that's incorrect, then most payroll services will not take responsibility for those issues, because it's up to the client to actually see those on the front end.
So I guess so. Like, okay, so what we talked about was obviously with QuickBooks, people have that information, but most people don't really know how to use all the functions of QuickBooks. So do you? I think when we were talking before, you mentioned that you are the person that actually makes sense of the information for the most part, and puts it in a usable. I guess. Would you say that you sort things out and kind of put it in a usable way for people to make better decisions? Is that kind of the essence of what you do, or what would you say?
Yeah, so on the front end, I help the clients not kind of screw things up
Yeah.
initially by I do some document review of what they're providing me to enter into the system. So actually, I am taking on a lot of responsibility that most payroll services are not. So like when an employee gets onboarded, my clients can enter all the information themselves, or if they don't feel comfortable with that, they can upload the documents securely to my website, and we can enter that information for them so that everything's getting off, on the right foot. And then after all the data has been processed, there are a lot of custom reports that clients often need. And I will either help them on the fly create those custom reports, or I can even write custom reports to be distributed with each payroll so that they can see what they need to see or what they want to see rather than all the noise. Because a small business without a lot of benefits isn't going to want to see a benefits report.
Right.
A larger business isn't going to necessarily want to see all of the little details. That would be a lengthy report. So, I customize things for them so that it just makes it easier for them to get into payroll and then get out.
Yeah, I mean, 'cause most people, that's not something that they really want to deal with. I mean, first of all, people don't like to see their money going out the door, so they don't like to look at that. But it's a tedious task. I mean, to go through all those things, to sort through all the numbers, and then to kind of take that high level perspective of, am I doing this right? Like, is this the right amount of money to be paying? How do you determine that? I know that that's kind of something that you are focusing on helping people with, as far as determining the right amount of pay. Is that right? Can you tell us a little bit about that?
Sure. So one of the services that we offer our clients for free is reasonable compensation reports. So on a one-off basis, we can determine based on a job description, a basic job description, and number of hours worked, demographics like geography, how much education background and experience the person has. And we can create a reasonable compensation report. I work with a third party on generating that.
Okay.
And then I proof it and send that off to the clients. I also am offering that as a free service to clients during COVID-19. So
okay, that's great.
Hopefully that'll help some people out.
Yeah, definitely. No, I mean, that's huge. It's, starting out any business, it's always, difficult to really figure out, well, what are my employees worth? I mean, it's how do you put a price tag on a person's work, and it's difficult in my mind, I think, to price that out, because, you can get a college student, somebody with a, straight out of college or whatever, that does great work, or somebody that didn't go to college that does great work, and somebody that's been in the business for a long time going through the motions, and then they're not worth anything, so that's a difficult thing, but to kind of have a little bit of guidance, I guess, is always good. So yeah, we'll put some information in the link in the description below, so people can visit your website, contact you for information about that. But I want to go back to that. So how do you really determine those things? I mean, it's just demographic info and kind of like industry standards. Is that kind of how you get that information?
Yeah, so there's statistical data that exists in multiple databases, and there are services out there that are being utilized to gather all that information. And a lot of it is really important. So you you touched on, there's a starting point for like college kids, right? They're coming out and they're willing to work their way up
Right.
the ladder, and you can start out at minimum wage and kind of gauge it from there. Minimum wage is obviously the least you can pay someone, but yeah, I mean, most of my clients use the service actually for the business owners themselves and executive pay. I think that's when it provides the most value to them, because a lot of, especially business owners, they want to pay themselves the least through payroll because they can save the most in taxes. But if they pay themselves less than a reasonable salary, that could lead to them having some issues with how much they paid in taxes down the road. If they were ever audited, they could have their tax status stripped and everything kind of recalculated with penalties and interest. So yeah, it's really important that they get that right and that they are basing their salary on actual data. Another thing that comes up is court documents are used to show like cases where people in the same field and with a similar background have actually made the argument that reasonable compensation was at a certain level. And that's another way to prove it. So we provide both, reports to show kind of like where things are at, the average, above average, below average ranges. And then we provide some resources as well to prove that.
And so essentially it's almost making a paper trail to protect yourself down the road from some sort of, legal trouble, which is always smart. What are some of the things that, because everybody knows that the business owner, for the most part, if they're not making a whole bunch of money, they're not going to pay themselves. They're going to invest that money back into the business and, do everything they can to just keep that flowing. So you're saying that's not the right way to go. What are the risks involved with not paying yourself anything or paying yourself next to nothing?
Well, I don't want to get too much into the details because that's more of like a business attorney question.
Sure.
But if you're an S Corp, if you're filing your taxes as an S Corp, then you have to pay yourself a reasonable salary. If you're an LLC or a sole proprietor, you have a lot more flexibility as to how much you pay yourself. So there are pros and cons to everything. I think a lot of times attorneys and CPAs recommend becoming an S Corp because you can save a lot of money on taxes, but they don't really go into the details about what is required in order to, qualify for that.
Sure.
So I talk to, most of my S Corp clients, we have this conversation because they don't know really why they're an S Corp and why they're paying themselves on payroll.
Right. Yeah. No, there's a lot of questions. And for the most part, small business owners in general, they went into business to do the thing that they do, whether they're a cook or, they changed, they work on cars, you know what I mean? It's like, that's what they do. Running the business and all that stuff is very difficult. It's a whole nother job, besides actually working inside your business. So hiring out, and I find a lot of times people will hold off on hiring somebody like you to handle and manage things because they feel like they're saving money. Make your case for why that isn't necessarily the best move. Why is it important to start early with that support?
Well, getting things right is like an insurance policy. You're covering yourself down the road for if you are ever audited or there are any issues that put a spotlight on your company.
Mm-hmm.
Paying yourself a reasonable salary, for example, is not just a requirement, but it's also a good business practice to do because you always want to pay yourself first and then base your, other expenses in your budget on what's left. You don't want to get to the point where you don't know if you're going to have any money left over at the end. You want to have like at least a base salary or payment to yourself.
Yeah.
As a starting point really is important, especially if you have a family to feed. And I know in the beginning when I started my business, making a profit wasn't as crucial as it was when I had my first son, and then it became exponentially more important when I had my second son. So
yeah, and we'll definitely touch on that as well. I know that's a big struggle, and I want to get into how you're balancing all that out currently. But let's talk a little bit about the PPP. I know that, with everything going on right now, all the uncertainty, people are really suffering. People are laid off. They're laying off their employees. And, for the most part, people don't want to have to do that. Nobody wants to lay off people that have worked hard to support their business. But how have you experienced the PPP from your perspective? What are some of the things that you can kind of enlighten us on?
Sure. So in the beginning, when it first came out, I was really excited about the opportunity for my clients to be able to utilize these funds. The first round obviously was a pretty epic failure. I think about 5% of my clients that applied actually got the funds. The good news is that in the second round, most of my clients did get the funds. The problem is that as it became unclear whether or not all of the funds would be forgivable, I had some clients that were really, really upset and struggling with the idea of taking on more debt during these times.
Right.
Debt was already racking up. And so, we had some really tough decisions to make. And I say we because my clients often, include me in helping them make these types of decisions. The payroll piece of it is one thing I had to really explain to people is you're not unemployment. You're not the unemployment agency. So if you don't have work for people, you need to let them go and let them get unemployment. I had a lot of clients that were just like, well, if I'm going to get it forgiven, I'll just go ahead and use it. But they didn't understand that they were incurring a lot of additional stress and tasks and just taking on a huge responsibility and liability for paying these people, and really not their responsibility. And I even spoke with a few of my clients' employees to kind of help explain that, because they didn't want to claim unemployment. They were too proud to claim unemployment.
Sure.
And they didn't understand why their employer, if they got the PPP, wouldn't use those funds to pay them and keep them off unemployment.
Yeah.
We're talking about restaurants and, people in the service industry that weren't able to take, if they were doing delivery or pickup, they weren't able to keep their whole staff. It just was impossible.
Of course.
So, it was really, really tough. Now we've gotten to the point where the economy is opening up. Things are picking up a little bit. I've actually, just yesterday, I had a client tell me that they're having their best month in a year. They're a printing company.
Yeah.
And I was ecstatic about that, because I was actually calling them to use their services, because I often want to use my clients' services to kind of help them just in general, but especially during these times.
Yeah.
So, things are getting a little bit better now. The issue is, okay, how do we maximize the forgiveness?
Yeah.
And Congress passed another bill to extend the 8-week period out to 24 weeks. But all of the timing changes as to whether or not you're bringing all of your employees back in time to get full forgiveness and be able to take advantage of that 24 weeks. It's still really up in the air whether or not the 24 weeks so you get more time, and instead of 75% of the forgivable portion having to be payroll, it's lowered to 60%. So you think on the surface, it's more advantageous to utilize the 24-week period, but it's not clear yet. And so that's really a difficult thing to explain to people right now, because if we have a second wave, then they might go back down to reduced levels and not sustain the full-time employees that maybe they'll have over the summer. So the forgivable amount would change if at the end of 24 weeks, we're in December.
Wow.
They have to, they have to now explain why they don't have full staff. Whereas if they stick with the 8 weeks, maybe less will be forgiven, or it guarantees that more will be forgiven. There's more of a guarantee there because they have more employees on staff. It's very murky waters.
It was rushed
a lot up in the air.
It was rushed through, obviously for good reason. A lot of people needed that money desperately. So, I mean, it's good that it's there, but there's a lot of uncertainty, and I figure that hopefully they'll pass a little bit more legislation to clarify some of these things, as they have already done. So yeah, it's a real struggle, I would assume, for people like you to, make those calls and kind of assist people in how to let people go, when to let people go, how to take this money on, because it's totally counterintuitive that you get this money and you still have to let people go. And it's one of the most difficult things you ever do. But you bring up a good point, especially with the restaurant industry. They don't get a set paycheck for the most part that's livable. I mean, it's mostly based on tips. So it's impossible to just keep everybody on staff. You can't do that. Can you speak on the restaurant industry a little bit deeper, kind of how you've, helped people out and the advice you've been giving?
Well, I think it's funny. I was kind of chomping at the bit here to kind of share with you that a lot of people in the service industry, or in restaurant industry, they rely on tips, and a lot of the tips are cash, and they're not reporting these tips.
Yeah.
So then when they go to claim unemployment, those wages are not really accounted for.
Right.
And for a lot of people, they just think, okay, I've never been on unemployment. I'll never have to be on unemployment. I'll always find something. But in this situation, they were not able to find something, and it lowered their, what they were able to get in unemployment, in some cases pretty significantly. So that's another reason to just really encourage employees to, for a number of reasons. To get financing for a house or a car, you need to be able to show that income. You need to be able to prove the income. You just never know. You don't know what's going to happen down the road. Yeah. And business owners too, you want to collect all the data that you can and have it in a place where you can access it. So,
yeah. Having more information in a usable way is always better. But yeah, as far as the unemployment part of that goes, I don't know how much you get into that for people. I know it's kind of in relation, but not your focus. I think that the $600 bonus that they put on the unemployment was very helpful, obviously, for the service industry workers. I think that it's probably one of the main reasons why they did that, right? Or one of the biggest benefits for those people. What do you think?
I think they did the additional $600. How they stumbled upon $600, I don't know, but
right.
They just picked I kind of wish they would have based it on something, because some people were getting paid more on unemployment than they were working.
Yeah.
Which in on one side of the coin, that's good because it's keeping people at home and quarantined, and it's flattening the curve.
Right.
But when it's time to come back and work, the employers are kind of left hanging because they don't want to be the bad guy now and rehire the people. So like they're the bad guy when they put them on unemployment and the bad guy when they,
right,
rehire them. It's a tough position to be in. The $600 is helpful, but yeah, I have mixed feelings on it. I think it should just be some calculation on top of what the normal unemployment would be, based on what they made before. So,
yeah, you actually brought up something that I wanted to touch on as far as the, making more on unemployment and not wanting to go back to work, not wanting to get that offer that you have to take. But how does that play into if you have this PPP loan, you end up laying people off or whatever? It's not going to be forgiven if people won't come back to work, right? Like, how does that work? Am I saying that backwards, or how does that work? How does that play into it?
Well, my understanding of it is that as long as you're hiring someone back, as long as you have the number of full-time employees,
okay,
that's what really matters. So if you end up hiring someone else to take the place of a person that's not wanting to come back, that will qualify. Another thing too is if you can't justify hiring people, I mean, you've tried and you've documented your efforts, and you can justify not being able to hire. There's some text in the law that it's very vague, but it says that if you can justify it, then that rule will not necessarily apply. So like,
that's interesting.
For example, if over 24 weeks or 8 weeks, you hit that percentage, right?
Mm-hmm.
You hit that percentage, but you still don't bring all of the people back. It's unclear, but it does seem like they're saying they're not gonna, split hairs over it. If you get close, if you made the attempt and you've documented everything, I think that they'll work with you.
Okay.
So.
And are you navigating through this with people a lot right now? I mean, is this high on your list of things that you're doing for your clients right now?
Yeah. So I have a custom report that I created to calculate what people should apply for the PPP loan.
Okay.
And then I also have probably 10 different formats of spreadsheets that clients are having me populate. So I'm having, an employee fill that out, and I'm kind of guiding them through it and proofreading it. It's not always clear what is acceptable and what isn't. A lot of these banks have their own spreadsheets and their own kind of set of criteria and how they are interpreting things. So it's going to be interesting on a bank by bank basis how things go.
Yeah.
So. Yeah,
and it is strange because it's a loan that's guaranteed by the federal government, but it goes through individual different banks, and so it's like so much uncertainty on every level. I mean, all around, it's got to be just wild, crazy times. So let me just ask you: are you tired of seeing spreadsheets yet, or what?
Well, especially now that like the forgiveness criteria is changing and things are up in the air, and the application for forgiveness hasn't even been updated yet for the 24-week period.
Wow.
So it does feel like a little bit of wasted effort filling these spreadsheets out without knowing for sure whether or not it's going to be that spreadsheet that they ultimately use.
Wow.
But the advice that I give all of my clients is treat the loan as if you're not going to get any of it forgiven.
Right. That's good advice.
Run your business as if you didn't get the loan. Do things that make sense business-wise. Don't do things because you believe it's going to be forgiven. Don't base everything on that. I think what the PPP has done for a lot of clients is it's kind of opened up some release valves and kind of relieved some stress which is good.
Yeah.
I just don't like the idea of my clients clinging to false hope.
Right. That'll sink their ship. I mean, if you run it as if it's, free money, it's going to be a rude awakening when they want it back.
I actually had one client that got an SBA loan and thought it was the PPP loan. They got the SBA, the EIDL disaster relief loan.
Yeah.
And they thought, and they were, I mean, if it wasn't for me kind of asking them questions and finding it out, we would have never known. And they immediately, it was within the 7 days, so they were able to send the money back and not have to owe any interest.
Yeah.
Because they didn't want a loan. They wanted just a sure thing, or more of a sure thing. So
yeah. And that is very confusing. I mean, when I was personally going through it myself, it was unclear because they were making up the acronyms of whatever the things are that nobody even knew what any of it meant. So when you go on your individual website for your bank or whatever SBA website, and there's a million different websites that are offering these things. I mean, I don't even know. I mean, I'm sure whatever banking app you use, there's like a banner stuck to the top about it. Everything that I use that has to do with money has some sort of PPP or loan or apply for this. So it's like, what did I even get? I can definitely see how that's probably not the only case of somebody getting the loan and thinking it's something else. Can you give us a little insight about the EIDL loan? How does that work? What's the difference? Just touch on it a little bit.
Sure. So SBA loans are a great way to borrow money if you're a small business. And not a lot of them are issued each year. So this is kind of crazy, the times that we're in. It's just like, I can't remember what the exact percentage is, but it's like I want to say normally it's like less than 5% of what's being issued now. Maybe it's even less than that, was issued normally on an average year, in amount wise and volume wise. And the loan terms are great. It's 30 years, 3.75%. They give you the maximum amount that you can borrow, and then you can, I think, lower that to as little as $1,000. It's a really great deal for small businesses that maybe were going to borrow money anyway,
right,
that needed to borrow money just to operate their business. I mean, it's a good opportunity to meet those requirements where before they wouldn't have been considered.
Yeah. Yeah. One of the things, just to clarify what this loan is, it's that disaster relief loan. Normally, obviously, you don't ever get a nationwide disaster that affects everybody across the board like we have right now. So, like you said, I mean, the amount of people that are even eligible to apply a lot of times for these loans are, in like disaster, like tornado zones and hurricane zones, or, earthquakes or volcanoes or whatever, So with this going on right now, do you know anything about, are they going to run out of funds for this? What if you're in the process of applying? How does that work? Do you have any experience with, any of the terms or anything like that, as far as what you have to do to get it?
Well, to be honest with you, I'm kind of in the dark, and I think most people are in the dark about whether or not the funds are going to run out. And it's kind of a first come, first serve basis is what what's been explained to me. And really, you're told in the beginning that things are going to happen a certain way.
Right.
Like initially, there was grant money tied to it. And initially, it was supposed to be $10,000 per business. Then they changed the rules to $1,000 per employee. So if you only have one employee, you only get 1,000 instead of the 10,000 maybe you thought you were going to get initially.
It's a big difference.
And this grant is not necessarily, it's not really tied to the SBA loan. It's tied to the PPP loan. So It lowers the amount you can have forgiven with PPP by that amount. So if you got the grant, then, that's already considered forgiven, right? That's money you don't have to pay back. And then I was told that the grant money was going to be arriving in 3 days. And I think it took about 30 days. And then I was told that within a couple weeks, an SBA loan specialist was going to reach out. That never happened. I got an email that actually went to spam or got filtered. So I didn't even know I had it. So that was me personally. And so I tried to communicate this to my clients, like, hey, double check this, double check that to make sure that, maybe you did receive it. I actually had one client that couldn't get the approval because their bank, it kept saying that they couldn't verify their bank.
Yeah.
And I helped them through that. For some reason, they needed like an official bank name exactly 100% matching. It didn't matter that the routing number and account number was correct. They needed the bank name to match.
Oh, wow.
Because when they first released the website, it didn't have a drop down to select the banks. You just had to type it in. And then after they added that functionality. So if you applied before that, then you didn't know it, but
you were getting
considered.
Yeah. That's being a web design person, that type of stuff frustrates me deeply, especially when you're dealing with people's livelihood. It's difficult. That process, I have been through it too. I haven't gotten any money yet, but I filled it out, did it. I haven't seen anything yet, but we'll keep our fingers crossed over here. It's crazy times. We can talk about these things, and obviously, like you said, we're kind of all in the dark. We're kind of playing it by ear. I think they're onto the third round of possibly passing another stimulus thing. I think it's in the works. So hopefully they're going to replenish these funds. I can't imagine why they wouldn't. If they're just printing more money and, making fake money, then they might as well just make a bill to say there's more of it. It's wild times. Let's move on. So payroll. Most people think of this stuff as something that they don't want to deal with. That they want somebody else to do this stuff. So why did you decide that this was the right move for you? I mean, I know you worked for these companies before, but what series of events in your life did it take to get you into this business?
Well, I mean, ADP and Paychex have really almost a monopoly, like a stronghold on everything. They are just rolling in the dough, and it's tough to compete with ADP and Paychex. I don't think you really can compete with ADP and Paychex. If you're going to offer the same service as them, there's really no competing with them. There are a lot of other payroll services out there that modeled their business after ADP and Paychex with a few extra little wrinkles. Mm-hmm. Some of them are doing okay, and some of them are just kind of plateauing a little bit, I think. And then ADP and Paychex, it's just when business owners are unhappy with the service, a lot of times it's just like with insurance. You go out, shop around, and you get a nice intro deal, and ADP and Paychex do that too. They fight over clients and offer these free payroll for 6 months kind of deals.
Yeah, crazy deals that nobody can compete with.
Right, exactly. So, I mean, I don't... I lean on automation because I have to. Like, there's just no way around it. You have, especially when you're small, you can't stay on top of all the calculations and all of the different, technology that you need to have updated in order to process all the payments and make sure that everybody's getting the direct deposits on time and that tax filings are in the right format. So I lean heavily on automation, but on the front end, I just spend a lot of time with the clients. I ask them a lot of questions. I question some of the decisions that they make. Mm-hmm. And so it's a different approach, I think, because it eats into my profit margin. I don't need my profit margin to be as healthy as Paychex and ADP because I'm not doing a whole lot of advertising. I don't have any salespeople. I rely 100% on word of mouth and referrals. So that has helped, allow me to be more proactive and reach out.
Well, you actually had a little bit of a story as far as how you got your business started. You said there was a little bit of a conversation that you had. Can you tell us a little bit about that?
Sure. So, I'd been complaining about the payroll industry for a couple of years with friends and family, and my father-in-law, who's an avid entrepreneur himself, and he got sick of hearing me complain.
Right.
And one day, I think there might have been some drinks involved, and we were sitting out on the lake, and he just he doesn't really beat around the bush too much. And he's just like, it's like, when are you going to put your big boy pants on and just start one of these services yourself? And I listed out like a few reasons why, money being the biggest one.
Yeah, it always is, right?
And he laughed and said, let's say all those things are taken care of. Then are you gonna finally man up? I think he might have phrased it.
Sure.
And I was just like, is this hypothetical, or are you helping me out here? And he's just like, don't worry about that. Just, are you going to start a business? And I said, I guess I am. Yes. Still not knowing that I was committing to starting a business.
Yeah.
I was kind of getting butterflies, and I was a little scared because it was just a big unknown for me. I didn't necessarily, I wasn't trying to become an entrepreneur at the time. So actually I was looking into real estate and investing in real estate and being a landlord.
Oh, wow.
And so a conversation I had with my wife was, hey, do we buy this 2 flat, or can I start this business? And she's just like, I'm going to let you make that decision on your own, and I'll just support you.
Wow. That's great. You got to keep her.
Well, I think she probably would have preferred that I just work a 9-to-5 job and not have all the stress and hours to go with running a business or being a landlord, to be honest. But
sure.
She's a keeper.
Well, that's good. And so, I mean, you say you didn't really want to become an entrepreneur. It's all the things you just mentioned. You don't have a set schedule. 9 to 5 is not realistic if you are running your own business. And people don't understand that, for the most part. And it's very difficult sometimes with these relationships to navigate through that, especially like you said, when you bring kids into the mix. You have responsibilities. You have to pay the bills, so you have to work twice as hard to get things off the ground. And that's a really serious thing that most people deal with that do this. And the ones that don't really expect that, those are the ones that are like, hey, I'm out. I'm going back to the 9 to 5. How did you navigate that? How have you been navigating that? And have you ever just maybe thought this wasn't the right move? You made the wrong decision.
I mean, every year that I make less than I would make
right.
as an employee working in the corporate world, I have a moment where I question it, for sure, because it's like I'm choosing to be poor.
Right.
It's choosing to work for less than a minimum wage sometimes.
Yeah, definitely.
It's crazy. I think that there are times I miss the stability of just being able to, it's 5 o'clock, I leave. I don't have to think about it anymore. But I've never really been that type of person. I've always been a workaholic. I've always been the type of person that thinks about the clients, even if they were for a business that I worked for and not my business. I worried about people and, how I can help. And so I think that this has been a good fit for me. I have clients that text me and call me on my cell phone, sometimes on the weekends. I think most of them understand that if I don't answer in the evenings or on the weekends, it's for a good reason.
Yeah.
I think that when I first started my business, I didn't really set boundaries, and I let my clients kind of dictate things. And until the coronavirus happened, and we're doing social distancing, and a lot of things are on Zoom, and people are just a lot more open about their situations.
Yeah, definitely.
And, talking more openly about family life and how to balance it with work and mental health, which is a big thing.
Huge thing.
And so it's kind of brought it back to the forefront. And now it's given me the opportunity to set those boundaries, which I am doing. So I think that's a really good thing that's going to come about from all of this. People just really learning that there are a lot of people out there struggling with the same things, and they don't have to go through this alone.
Yeah. So. Well, that's nicely put. It's very true. I mean, if there's anything that comes out of this, there's going to be a lot of self-reflection. People are going to take a look at how they were operating their life before this happened, and probably make a lot of changes for the better. It puts things into perspective when you have to sit down and you have to take a break. Not everybody has that opportunity. People like me, I used to work from home before this, and I still do. But it's like it still has an impact. A huge impact, and I think that's going to be a net positive if we can get through it okay on the other side. As far as setting boundaries, though, I always like to hear kind of how people decide those things and what decisions that they make. So tell us a little bit about the boundaries that you had to put up.
Well, I didn't have to put as many boundaries up before the coronavirus. With the coronavirus and the kids being home with us all day, every day, I've had to, with my wife working from home as well. I mean, we're both, both parents we're still together.
Yeah.
And so it's, I'm not going to say that we have it any worse than, other families, especially ones that are single parents. That's got to be the worst. At least I have someone's shoulder to cry on.
Sure. Yeah. At times. I'm sure you need it. Yeah.
But my wife, she relies on grant money for her income and for her job, and she works in research. So she's got a lot of pressure on her to perform and do things. So she needs to be working.
Yeah.
If not 40 hours a week, more than 40 hours a week, or at least in that headspace. And for me, obviously, I need to work more than 40 hours a week.
Yeah. So
you do the math, and it's like, okay, how many hours of television and tablets do my children have to be on? The way we've kind of structured things is my wife is supposed to be getting up at 6 a.m. and working until noon. And then I have the kids that time, and then they usually don't get up until 8. Fortunately, my wife gets up close to that time too. So she doesn't always get the full 6-hour shift that she's supposed to.
Right.
But which makes me feel guilty sometimes. But then I get the noon to 6 shift. And then from 6 to 8, we're supposed to all spend time together as a family.
Yeah.
And then I say supposed to, because if things come up, then sometimes I end up just keep working.
Yeah. Yeah.
Or she starts working again. And then at 8, my kids are supposed to go to bed. And then I try to muster up enough energy and willpower to work some more.
Yeah.
But it's exhausting. I mean, it's just, it's getting pulled in so many directions, and things that you're really passionate about that you kind of feel like you're just set up for failure.
Yeah.
When it comes to the business and being a parent. I've even told my wife, I'm like, hey, I'm sorry, I'm just going to take you for granted because all I can focus on right now is just like being a dad and running this business.
Yeah.
And she understands that too. We kind of take each other for granted, and it's beautiful in a way.
Yeah.
kind of weird, but
I could see that.
yeah.
Yeah. I mean, when you're honest about things like that, I mean, and it really is not like from a place of, I mean, it's the way it has to be, right? I mean, you can't do all the things all the time. Something has to kind of give, and I mean, I guess in a relationship that's healthy, I mean, you should be able to kind of be able to lean on that person and lean on each other. So that is a good thing. I like that. And it's good. It's good for the kids too, I'd imagine. Beforehand though, were you working? Were you commuting before a lot? Were you guys working from home before, or how did that work out?
Yeah. So I have an office in a co-working space. Well, not really an office, but a desk.
Right.
And my wife has an office at Northwestern, and we had a lot of flexibility. So unless we had meetings, we didn't necessarily have to be in the office.
Yeah.
So it was, that part of the transition was not too bad. The Zoom fatigue definitely kicked in with all the Zoom meetings that we had to have with employees and clients and doing networking and all that. That's kind of been wearing on us for sure.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah, I mean, like I said when we first started this, I don't really like doing these. I'd rather do it in person when we do these conversations. But yeah, I mean, it's a great tool. If we didn't have it, we would really be screwed right now. And not having the ability to kind of do this connection and conference like this. So that's a good thing. But when we do finally get back to some sort of normal, what is that going to look like? What's going to change? What's going to stay the same as how you're doing it now? Are you going to, try to get into an office setting again? How's that going to look for you? What do you think?
I'm not really that concerned about the office environment as much as some people.
Yeah.
I've never really been much of a germaphobe to begin with. So I kind of feel like once there's a vaccine in place and my kids are going back to school, that's when normal can start happening again.
Right.
And really, I would just probably do the same thing I did before, which is go to the office when I need to, work from home when I don't. I'd have a lot more opportunities to socialize in person with people, which would be nice because of just all of the phone call meetings and the Zoom meetings. I've been really reluctant to reach out to people just because I need a break. I need a break from it.
Yeah, definitely.
It's sad because I feel like I don't have as many of those personal relationships as I used to have. Like right now, not a lot of the close personal relationships. So I hope that once things get back to normal, that I'll be able to develop those and get those back to where they need to be. One example is kind of in an argument with my wife right now about whether or not I can go play beach volleyball.
Uh-oh.
I have some friends that are setting up a time on Thursday, so tomorrow, and they're taking some precautions. But
yeah.
when you're sweating and you're going up to block spikes and you're within 6 inches from each other, a lot of times it's hard to stop the droplets from getting on you.
Sure.
So it's probably an argument I'm going to lose.
Well, you said it. I don't know. I mean, you know who the boss is a lot of times, right? What do they say a lot of times? I wear the pants, but she chooses what color. That's a saying that we used to use, but it's I mean, it's a strange world. I think that, as far as getting back out, there's only so much safety you have to live your life at some point. I was talking about this with a dentist that I just had on the other day. I mean, you can't be a dentist and social distance. You're in people's mouth, so people still have cavities. It doesn't stop just because there's this thing going on. So we have to take these risks, at some point. I mean, if you are a healthy person, I mean, the chances, it seems, are very low that anything's going to happen. And hopefully it stays that way. But at some point, everybody has their own opinion. And especially when you have young kids, it's a lot more of a difficult situation, to kind of navigate that. But I don't, how are they going to make a vaccine? And, I don't know. I just don't know. But it's crazy times. So let's look to the future, a little positive stuff. I know that you have some other things on the horizon that you have been kind of working on, aside from your main business, as far as the payroll goes, the bookkeeping, some of the other services that you're looking to kind of develop with technology. Can you tell us a little bit about what your plans are?
Sure. So I started bookkeeping back in 2000. I was helping a friend with their small business. And so I've always been interested in accounting. And so I started way back then, took a big break, worked on payroll. But then when I started my business, I had a lot of clients that they wanted bookkeeping and payroll together.
Right.
And I was desperate. I couldn't say no. I had to find a way to keep these clients. And through the first 2 years of operating a payroll service and having to keep track of escrow accounts and making sure everything's in balance for multiple clients, not just your own business operating account, I picked up a lot of really good habits and a lot of really good strategies, techniques that I've used to help track different accounts and be able to see which clients are more profitable than others, which is huge. I mean, if a business can't figure out which client is more profitable and narrow it and pin it down to like what criteria they need to meet to be profitable enough, then they need to see someone. They need to have someone look at their books. And so I started doing that in 2014, not really thinking much of it. To be honest, I was looking for bookkeepers to take that on so that I could just focus on the payroll. And then it was in 2018, I hired an employee to take over the payroll operations for me so that I could concentrate on growing and developing the bookkeeping piece, because bookkeeping, I feel like it should be treated similarly to payroll. Like if you have an employee, you almost always are going to hire a payroll service because you don't want to take on the responsibility of tax filings, the tax deposits. You definitely don't want to be doing direct deposits and, creating pay stubs and having to deal with all that. And I think that bookkeeping should be the same way. Bookkeeping needs to be, if you're not an expert already and you don't have the time or you haven't hired a person internally, then you need to hire a service. And my problem with the traditional bookkeeping services out there is that you either have like a traditional bookkeeper that gets paid $25 to $50 an hour, and $50 an hour for like someone who's really good usually. And you're paying $50 an hour for somebody to do basic data entry for part of the time. Yeah. And you're only utilizing them for the strategy part a very small fraction of the time, if at all. A lot of times bookkeepers are trying to maximize their profits and minimize how much time they're spending on clients. So they take on more clients than they can actually do, and they do the bare minimum for all of them. And, that's a shame to me. And then there's also accounting firms that offer bookkeeping, right? For the same reason I offer bookkeeping in the beginning. They didn't want to lose their clients. And they give their junior accountants or, whoever kind of the keys to the car, and they're driving it like kind of wherever, they have time to
learn it on the job.
Yeah. Especially the smaller businesses get the trainees, you know.
Yeah.
Oh, here's a small business. They're really easy.
Yeah.
So
And it's the opposite. In reality, it's the opposite. I mean, when you're the small business starting out, you really need the smart top, top brass on the job, So it's like, no, I definitely get where you're coming from. And one of the things that was very interesting to me that makes perfect sense that I think is so important for small businesses to really consider is the more information that you have. I mean, you have a business, you have all these numbers floating around, cash coming in, cash going out, you have all this stuff happening. And, that we have the technology nowadays. We have computers, we have spreadsheets, we have software that can manage these things. But if you don't really know how to read this information in a meaningful way and organize it in a way that you can actually use it to make better decisions, then you're just wasting all this stuff. So, making calculated decisions, planning for the future, deciding the right price for a product or, how much to pay this person and, all the different things that float around on your spreadsheets all day. You're the person that can actually help people come up with sound strategies and plans using the information that their company's already generating. Isn't that about right?
Yeah, I mean, I like to be the liaison or the bridge between the client and the CPA or the consultants.
Yeah.
The floating CFOs, that's really big right now.
Sure.
Floating CFOs charge anywhere between $500 to $1,000 an hour.
Wow.
And so the time spent with them needs to be really, really, precise and calculated.
Mm-hmm.
You can't just show up with financials that are just, cookie cutter and, everything's thrown in there. They're going to want to see things in a way that's different than a tax accountant wants to see them. A tax accountant, that's most of my clients are trained to make it as easy for their tax accountant as possible. That's like their goal with their bookkeeping, just so that they spend the less on tax filings.
Right.
They're not even really using the data in their accounting software to make financial decisions.
Right.
I mean, most of them live out of their bank, their online bank platform.
Right.
They're just looking at how much money they have in their account, and they kind of do the math in their head about how much is going to come out before they're paid next, and that's all they're thinking about.
Yeah.
And so, yeah, it's something that I think that
super useful.
Right. I mean, well, so people ask me, well, why don't you want to be the floating CFO? Why don't you want to be the consultant? And I think that there are enough of those people out there. There's just not enough of the liaisons that are going to be able to package the information in a way that's going to be helpful. So that doesn't, I mean, if I'm going to be a floating CFO, I'm going to want to be I'm charging my clients hundreds of dollars an hour. And if I'm charging them hundreds of dollars an hour, I'm not going to want to do this other, what's considered lower level work. Really shouldn't be considered that.
Right.
I have clients that enter their transactions themselves. And then what I'll do is I will look at their financials to make sense of it. And I'll go over each account with them. Why did you put it in this bucket? Why did you put it in that bucket? What if we set up these other wrinkles and did this or that? And I ask them about how their business operates and how, what type of client is their most profitable client. And so, yeah, a lot of people aren't asking those questions.
Yeah, it's important to ask the right questions, but it's really hard when you don't know what the right questions are. I mean, you don't even know what questions are possible, what even makes sense. It goes back to the small business owner does what they do, and the running business part is a secondary part of that job, a lot of times. It's really important to have somebody like you to navigate. So where do you see yourself building this? I mean, obviously there's a hiccup right now with all this stuff, but is there a big bump in business? Are you seeing an increase in business, or is it getting slower for you? Because I'm not quite sure how this would affect you.
It seems to be kind of the same.
Okay.
I have more clients asking for services, for help, for referrals to other services that might be able to save them money. So I'm getting a lot of clients that are asking for referrals to commercial insurance agents, to workers' comp insurance companies, which I partnered with a workers' comp company that does pay as you go. So instead of paying one huge premium each year or breaking it out twice a year, it comes out each payroll broken out, and also saving them quite a bit of money. So that's kind of what I'm getting more of. I'm not seeing much of a difference in how many new clients I'm getting. It was weird. The first week of the shutdown here in Illinois, I got 3 clients in the same week.
Yeah.
That was weird. That was really weird. That was like 3 clients in a week for me is on the high end. And
yeah, sure.
And that wasn't what I was expecting. So
it's strange. It's strange to see kind of how things play out with this. I mean, for businesses like you that are really support businesses, I feel like people are really in need of that support right now. So it makes a lot more sense for businesses to not have to stress about this stuff and leave it up to a professional so they can trust that it gets done correctly, which is so important right now. So, the services that you offer, you're offering, payroll services. It's not accounting, but it's, payroll, bookkeeping services. And what is, I guess, what, as a professional, what are the main services that you feel will be the most helpful to small business owners during these times that you currently offer? What are the things that you think people can call you for right now that you'll actually be able to make a positive shift for them?
Sure. So one of the things that I'm offering clients right now, new clients and existing clients, is the ability to hold off on making tax payments and keep their tax money in house so that they can keep a positive cash flow. I have some clients that now they use me for just reporting and no tax payments at all. I have some that are having me pay the state taxes but not federal, because when you're going through a national disaster, you can use that as an excuse for paying your taxes late.
Yeah.
Now, I'm not recommending that people do this. There's actually certain taxes that you can pay late, and it's not considered a crime.
Yeah, right.
So, like employer taxes, a lot of times you can get away with, but the trust taxes that are getting withheld from employees' checks, I always really strongly encourage my clients to pay those. But I'm empowering my clients and I'm giving them a lot of flexibility. I think that's number one right now is the services that can afford to do, to provide flexibility to their clients. If they're doing that, that's a good thing. Also, another thing I'll touch on is the tax credit that's out there. There's a tax credit, which you can't do if you get the PPP. But then there's also tax deferrals, which you can defer your employer FICA taxes up to a year. So at the end of the year, and then they're offering to do it next year as well, I believe.
Helpful.
And so that's something that I'm helping my clients. It makes more work for me, but it's worth it if their businesses are able to avoid getting overdraft fees. And,
yeah. Well, you definitely
want credit getting hit.
You want to make sure they're in business so they can continue to be your client, or that's helpful. Yeah, a little extra work now will save you in the long run, I figure. And it's crazy. Like I said, whenever we do these things, it flies by. We already did more than an hour. And we never touch on all the things that we wanted to talk about. Like I said before, we talked for like 2 hours about lots of different things. I have all these notes of all these things that I wanted to talk about. Maybe we'll have you back, to touch on some of the, after the fact, when we get back to business a little bit more, and you kind of have a better idea of how these things played out, and maybe, some of the ways to correct some of the mistakes that people are definitely making right now because there's so much uncertainty, unfortunately. But for now, what is the best way to get a hold of you? And I guess we'll definitely put that information in the description below. Tell us how to reach out and get a hold of you for service.
Sure. So the main way is just my website, www.infocuspayroll.com. And at the bottom, you can actually schedule a free consultation if you'd like. I offer 1-hour free consultations to all prospective clients. And I'm trying to provide value during that time and not actually just try to pitch my service to you.
Yeah.
My email address is brian@infocuspayroll.com. I'm on Facebook, Twitter.
Yeah, you name
Instagram,
it. Right?
I'm still trying to get the hang of. So
I don't like Instagram. I don't like Instagram myself, but yeah, it's. I'm sure they can find the links on the website. That's infocuspayroll.com. And again, this is Brian Bohley. It's payroll, bookkeeping, and he's located out in Evanston. If you're around the Chicagoland area, definitely give him a call. And I know that he knows his stuff after listening to this and our previous call. I know he's definitely more than willing to not only help you with these things, but educate you in the process, which is a lot more valuable than some of the other services that you'll get in the same space. So, Brian, I really, really do appreciate this. I wish we had more time, but it always flies by. So it's really great talking with you, and we'll be talking again soon.
Sounds good. Thanks for having me, Steve.